Strange New Worlds Season 3 is going to be hitting our screens in July. Finally. Finished filming over a year ago. But is Star Trek Strange New Worlds, what one fan said in a comment on my videos, just very expensive or very well funded fan fiction? Is that a fair statement? Let's have a chat about it. Welcome to the Tachyon Pulse podcast.
Our Tachyon pulse has been unable to completely penetrate the anomaly.
Now, it is fair to say that Discovery and Picard, seasons 1 and 2 in particular, weren't that bothered about canon. They weren't even that bothered about what the Klingons looked like or any of the history about the Federation and the Klingon relationship. They just peed all over canon at times, as far as I'm concerned. Michael Burnham had Spock as a half-brother, randomly. And there was quite a few other historical events that just boggled the mind when it came to Star Trek fans and our, let's say, affection with actually getting things right. But over the years, canon has become confused with things like the Eugenics War and the World War III event that, led to First Contact. There are certain things that are dated and are set in stone that were mentioned on screen. But to keep Star Trek in line with sort of our own history and to basically make it that it could still in theory happen, so certain events like the Eugenics War need to still be in our future, it was decided under Strange New Worlds to change certain events. So when the Eugenics War happened is now different. When the Botany Bay was launched is now different. Under Strange New Worlds, they changed canon. Is that a massive problem? And does it basically mean that this is no longer the Prime Universe? Is it some other new Bizarro universe, Kurtzman universe, and therefore, effectively, just fan fiction? Well, I'm not actually sure that statement is fair. Because, okay, they changed these two major events, and we've changed Khan. We saw Khan as a young boy when he should have already been aboard the Botany Bay frozen as an icicle. But they did that to try and continue the suspension of disbelief that Star Trek is kind of our own future. So, even though I don't agree with that principle, I can kind of see why they did it. I wouldn't have done it, but at least I can understand why they chose to. There are other things, though, within Strange New Worlds that I've argued are breaking canon, but it's a fine line. Okay, let's talk about Spock and Nurse Chapel's relationship. Now, in the original series, Spock and Nurse Chapel did have an affection. There were a few moments within a couple of episodes where Spock and Nurse Chapel were not affectionate with each other, but they clearly had a bond. Now, you could argue that what's going on in Strange New Worlds between his girlfriend from Vulcan and Chapel and Spock is just actually adding to that timeline, adding to that history. And it doesn't really change or step on anything that happened in the original series. It just sort of adds to it. Now, you have to suspend disbelief a little bit, but remembering that Spock is very logical, you could actually see that if he then decided not to have a relationship with Chapel, that he would compartmentalize it. Difficult to say. I think that's giving Star Trek Strange New Worlds and Akiva Goldsman, etc., a bit of credit on this one, because I actually think what they've done to Spock is breaking canon, because they are exploring his Vulcan human side far more aggressively than they ever did in the original series, and really more than they did until we saw him in the later movies. Now, what I'm trying to say by that is they're kind of taking away from the original series, the movies, and Leonard Nimoy's version of this character, because this isn't the character under Strange New Worlds that we're in Ethan Peck's version of Spock that we're then seeing in the original series. He is a different Spock. Now, that does make it a little bit more difficult to say that they're not breaking canon. I would say they're definitely blurring it, and we're in a grey area. They're not necessarily breaking it. And this is the problem I think Strange New Worlds has occasionally, that it is actually quite good at not breaking canon too much, or if it does it for a reason, but it does bend canon a lot. And that really is going into my next point. Kirk and Pike were best of friends, buddies, in the J.J. Abrams movies. They're not supposed to be in the original series. They barely know each other. It does actually reference that Kirk met him when he took over as fleet commander, or Pike took over as fleet commander, and he's aware of Pike, but they weren't friendly. The one thing about that was towards the end of the first series, it was actually canon, I believe. I'm going to get this wrong now, but that Kirk was supposed to be in command of the Enterprise when we first sort of there was an aggressive situation with the Romulans. So again, Strange New Worlds got around that canon rule, or that moment in history in Star Trek, by getting Pike to stand down and give command of the Enterprise to Kirk early, when he was still aboard the Farragut. Technically, it's a bit of a cop-out, but again, it's not technically breaking canon. What they did is technically accurate in the canon that we understood. So again, I don't think we can complain too much. They understood the history, and okay, to tell the story, they got around it. It's irritating sometimes, but it's not breaking canon. The bigger part of the problem for me is that Kirk is spending so much time on the Enterprise now, you do wonder what his commanding officer over at the Farragut is thinking. It's just, where's Kirk gone again? He's on board the Enterprise. God, he loves that ship, doesn't he? Well, he does grow to love that ship. But at the moment, he is spending an awful lot of time aboard the Enterprise. He's going to again in the third season, and God knows what they're going to do in the fourth and fifth seasons. They've got this actor that they cast as Kirk, and to be honest, I've said this a million times, they've brought him into Strange New Worlds far too soon. Bringing in a Kirk character should have been something they did in the fifth season. Why they did it in the first season, I've no clue. It was so stupid. But they did. But actually, again, I'm going to defend Strange New Worlds and Akiva Goldsman here and the writers a little bit. Because if you actually watch the episodes back, other than the end of the first season where Kirk and Pike do this change of command jobby, a lot of the times that Kirk is aboard the Enterprise, he doesn't actually interact with Pike a great deal. They don't spend time together. His relationships are being built with other members of the crew. Now, Pike knows Kirk's brother, and that's fine because, again, that's a canon point in history that Kirk was aboard the Enterprise before Kirk's brother was aboard the Enterprise before Kirk was, his little brother. We're going to see him die at some point. It's canon. But the amount of times Kirk ends up on the Enterprise really is maybe not breaking the rules, but I would say it's breaking the spirit of the rules. Have you ever heard this in games? Sometimes, you're playing a sport and you say, okay, well, what they've done there is technically not illegal. It's technically not a foul or a penalty or whatever else, but it's not in the spirit of the game. That's where I kind of put Strange New Worlds, because they decided to do this bloody prequel. I wish they would stop doing prequels, because they always have this problem. But because they decided to do this prequel, they were always going to have problems with canon. Now, they chose to really try to think about it and to try to, come up with clever ways to tell the stories they wanted to tell without changing canon too much. But what they could have done instead was just done a series in the Prime Universe after the events of Picard and TNG and everything else, and not worried about any of this. But no, they have to do prequels. They had to do Discovery, which crapped on canon. They had to do Enterprise. They had to do bloody Strange New Worlds. Instead, and causing themselves all of these problems that then annoy the hardcore fans. Now, Strange New Worlds is less guilty of this than Picard Seasons 1 and 2 and Discovery. But it is still frustrating at times. But the question was, is it just very expensive fan fiction? Not for me. That's a really unfair statement to make for me. But I can kind of understand why some people would think it. Is Strange New Worlds a different timeline, or is it the Prime Universe? To be honest, you could very easily argue that it's a different timeline, and that would explain a lot of the little blurry moments within canon that I've mentioned. But it's a TV show. We have to give them some license to make some changes. We have to, if we want to enjoy this show, suspend a little bit of our Trekkie eye for detail. Star Trek the original series made mistakes with canon. TNG did, Voyager did, DS9 did. You know, if you get into the minutiae of every little detail, then you will find mistakes in any TV show that's run on for decades with hundreds upon hundreds of episodes. Now, it's been done a lot more under Kurtzman than it was ever done under Braga, etc. But you still have to give them a little bit of leeway for me. I wish they were a bit better at keeping the detail, but they're not too bad. But what do you guys think? That's what's most important here. How important is canon? Are we allowed and giving them a little bit of a grey area where they can fudge the lines a little bit? Is that only fair? And should we not worry too much about when they make a mistake? Is it actually worse when they make a deliberate change to canon like they did with Eugenics War? Is that in some ways worse than just, misspeaking or putting in a wrong date or something? I'm in two minds about that one. At least they thought about it, which is better than just making a stupid mistake, in my opinion. But what do you think? Get into the comments. And Kirk, do you agree with me? Is he aboard the Enterprise too much? Get into the comments and tell me exactly what you think. And at the end of the day, is Strange New Worlds a good show? Is it good Star Trek? Or is it just very expensive fan fiction? You can decide in the comments. If you are new to the channel, please like, subscribe, hit the bell notification. It really helps us out and you'll never miss any of our new videos. Also, you can become a member of the channel and get to see a lot of our videos 24 hours before everybody else. So go check that out. As always, please stay safe and I'll see you next time.
Our tachyon pulse has been unable to completely penetrate the anomaly.